Hey guys, welcome to the second part of our procedural stream series in Houdini. In this tutorial, we'll mostly dive into Unreal and create the materials for our terrain and our river. But if you don't have the file, don't worry. You can just go to our website, click on the procedural stream series, scroll all the way down, click on the Houdini logo. This will download the scene file automatically, and as you can see, it's here in my downloads. So let's jump into Houdini and start working. So in Houdini, let's open up our previous downloaded file. And as you can see, I've modified the node structure a little bit to make sure that everything looks a little bit more nice. We still have our outputs here. We have our water surface, we have our flow maps, and on this side we have our terrain with our indented riverbed. So first thing I'm going to do is, because we're going to work with Unreal Engine, I'm going to create a game collision. So top collision, and I'm going to create a game engine collision. And this game engine collision, what it basically does is it creates a group. I'm going to show you right now. And it groups all the geometry inside based on our primitives, as you can see. Well, that's basically all I need for now for the collision object. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a null node again, so we will have our output. I'm going to color this purple again, and I'm going to give it our own custom shape. I'm going to call this out collision. I'm going to copy this node because I don't just want to have the collision, but I also want to have the geometry, because the collision is only a group that gets used by Unreal Engine to actually create collision meshes. So it's not our actual mesh. Create geo, then hook this one up into our final merge node. I'll switch this around a little bit so we have a nice left to right flow, and then I'm going to delete everything that's under here. And if I go to my output node, you can see the final terrain retopologized and with all the colors added. I'll remove the grid. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. But I don't need all that, because eventually in Unreal I'll be creating the materials. So I'll delete these nodes, and we are back to our original mesh. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some Unreal materials. There are multiple materials, such as Unity as well, but I'm going to use Unreal since we're going to work with Unreal today. And I'm going to put that in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the group to riverbed. I'm going to change the name of my node as well, and I'm basically going to copy this step twice for the other materials. So we have riverbed, we have our terrain, and we have our final water. I'm gonna name this one as well. Alright, so that's basically all that it takes for setting up this simple HDA, or well, simple HDA. But we actually still need to create a digital asset out of this. So I'm going to select all the nodes that I have, except for the original input nodes, which is the curve and the grid. And I'm going to collapse these into a subnet. And creating this as a subnet actually allows me, let's hit L so we have a nicer view of what we're doing. So basically what this subnet allows me to do is I can go to assets and create a new digital asset from my selection. And what I can do here is I can call this an example procedural stream HDA. And I'll still have to save this one. So I'm going to search for my location. I'm just going to hit it on the desktop, accept, and I'll have my location. I'm going to hit accept, and a new window is going to pop up. And in this window you can already see that the minimum inputs and maximum inputs are set correctly, because we need 2 inputs. And right now we only need 1 output, which is our terrain and our river. I'm going to hit accept. I'm going to rename this one to our procedural stream HDA and I'm gonna dive back in again. Okay, so in our system, as you can see, there are now two inputs, subnetwork 2, which is our grid, and the subnetwork 1, which is our curve. And that's exactly what we want, because later on in Unreal, we'll be setting the curve as our first input and our terrain as our second. And now since we've created our digital asset, we can actually assign some parameters to it. And the first one that we want to assign is the width of our river. So we drew a line, and the length of this line is going to be the eventual width of our river. So if I look at my sweep and I show this one, I can see that they're related to each other. So I want to promote the length parameter, because that's the one that will decide on how large my river is going to be. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to Assets, Edit Asset Properties, and then I can actually change some parameters up. Go into the parameters, and the convenient thing here is that I can just drag the length in there, and I'm going to, instead of calling this length, I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to rename it to river width. I want to have a minimum value of 1 because I don't want it to go to 0, and for now I think 5 is going to be big enough. I'm going to go into my channels, set my basic value to what this just was, and I think that was something like 3. I'm going to hit accept, and we have our line. And now if I go out and I select my river, I can see that there's like a new parameter here called river width, and I can change this one, say to the biggest one that I had. If I call this one 5, you can see how the width of my riverbed and my river has upgraded. And because it's all procedural, this line that we're using here is also influencing the line that we use for our geometry of the water surface. And that's of course great. And the next thing I want to be able to do is actually change the height of my water. As you remember, we made that transform before. And from this one, I'm not going to put this directly into our HDA, but I'm going to create my own parameter, and I'm going to link them up. So what I'm going to do is I want one single float. So I'm dragging the float in here, and here I'm calling it water height. And then as a parameter, I'm calling it water height. You can basically adjust those as you want. And I want my range to be from 0 to say, I don't know, 1 in this example. I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to accept this one. So now when I go out and I select this one, I can copy this parameter, I can dive back in, and in my water height, I'm going to paste relative reference. I'm going to give this negative value. Right now it's set to 0, but again, if we go out and we set this one to 0.3, you see that the water updates. If I set it to 0.5, 0.7, 1, you see the change in the water level. And that's exactly what we want. I reset this one, and I want to give this a basic value. So again, asset, edit asset properties, river width, channels, setting it to 0.3 because that was the value that we had before. Hit apply, hit accept, and that's it for now for this HDA. Set this one to the basic value, which is supposed to have, which is 0.3. And in this example, I'm going to save my file as a second iteration, because this is our part 2 of the tutorial. So heading to Unreal, I'm first going to start off and create a new project. And I'm going to name this Procedural Stream. I'm going to hit create for the, let's choose a funny one. Which one will work? Third person, I think, can work for us. So we can walk around in our scene later on as well. Right, create project. so right off the bat, this is the level that we start with. And there's some stuff in there that I don't really need right now. This. I'm just gonna delete all these parts that are not really interesting to me. I'll probably delete the walls and the floor as well. It's gonna delete this one as well. All right. So from this position, I'm just quickly gonna create my content browser. Open that up, and in here I'm gonna create a new file, and I'm just gonna create some folders. So here I'm going to create my material, create a texture. Well, let's do this as a HDA for now. Alright, so in my materials, I'm going to create the materials that I eventually will be using. So let's create a material, and let's name it, say, material Flowmap. Alright, I'm going to click right, and I'm going to copy my reference. And this basically works the same as if we would in Houdini. So let's head to Houdini again, and we're gonna dive into our asset, and in here we can actually set the material right now. So go in here, delete this, and then we can just hit Ctrl V, and this will create the material path that I have. I'm going to delete the first part. It's called material. Delete the last tip. And now this geometry that gets created here gets automatically assigned to the right material, which is a really convenient thing for us, since eventually we will be working and creating the material on the go, and we'll be adjusting it. And this way, it automatically updates whenever we update our tool. Alright, so because we created our project right now in Unreal, we actually have access to our path. So in our third person blueprint that we created, we now have access to the HDAs and the materials. And the most convenient thing for us would to actually be like saving our HDA either in here, so we can keep updating it and we don't have to reload it every time. Or the same thing for our materials. So in our materials, this path that I have here right now, I'm gonna copy it, so Ctrl C, and then later on when I'm going to set the flow maps, which we're gonna export with a ROP network. So I'm gonna tap ROP network, and then in here I'm gonna go to the games development toolset, and from the games development toolset 1.43 I'm gonna drag in the baker, and then here I'm gonna set my out flow map bake. I'm gonna export it relative path, and then from here I'm gonna change the resolution because we actually don't need it to be that big. And in here I'm gonna go to the location we had materials. I'm gonna call this texture flow map .2ga. Accept. Yeah, that's correct. And then we don't need the normals, we only need the base color. And from here I'm gonna copy this one. So Ctrl C. I'm gonna go out back into my OBJ again. I'm gonna dive in, and I'm gonna paste in my ROPNet. So I'm gonna paste this one. Make it a little bit bigger. Alright. And the cool thing is because we're working in this ROPNet inside of our HDA, we can actually go into assets, edit asset properties, and then from here we can just drag the render button here. Instead of render it, I will call this maps. Accept. All right, and that means that if we go out and have our HDA, we now have our recalculate Flowmaps button. And that's actually pretty cool, because now if we go back into our procedural stream here and we go to our content, materials, now nothing shows, but when I recalculate it, it's going to execute the games baker and it's going to render out our texture for the flow maps. Alright, and as you can see, it generated our TGA flow map for us. And that means we can jump back again into Unreal. And now it's going to import this file. It shows up here as well, which is really convenient and cool. And you can see that because we worked, just going to open this one up real quick. You see that our flow maps get generated all according to the settings we had before. So I'm going to dive into my material, and this is where we actually start creating. So I'm just going to drag our flow map texture in here, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Since we're working with a flow map, we're actually going to type in flow map simple. And flow maps take in the red and the green channel, so we're going to use a mask. It's the component mask, and we're going to get our red and our green channels out there. The right one in there, and only red and green going. Well, from there we actually want to be able to scale a little bit. So we're going to have a constant by scale, and I'm going to hit this one in there and get this one into our flow vector map. I'm going to set this one to -1 because I want to be able to go from, oh, that was a little bit too much, going from -1 to 1. And I'm going to have this one up in the normals into our own normals. And that's not just it, because we'll need a color for our river as well. So I'm going to create a vector, and I'm going to hook that up as the base color. And here I'm just going to give it a color. Let's use our river or a procedural stream. Then I'm going to create a constant, and I'm going to hook that up into our roughness. And we don't need a lot of roughness, so we can set this one to 0. I don't know, something small. And then for our flow maps, we still want to have a normal. So I'm just quickly going to copy our texture. I'm going to create a texture object. And since we don't have a normal map currently, I'm just going to hook up the one that we have in here. Alright, so let's apply this. Let's see how that looks. But before anything else, I want to change some settings in this one. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to set my blend mode to translucent and my translucency to surface translucency volume. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a depth field or depth fade. And I'm going to make sure that we blend something like a low value, 0.2. And I'm going to hook that up to our opacity. So now the closer our water gets to the rocks, the more it blends. Alright, let's exaggerate the normals a little bit. And move this a little bit out of the way. So we're going to use a multiply. hook this one up here into our normals, creating this one. We are gonna exaggerate our original channels, so our red and our green is gonna be 1, and then this one we can set to something like 0.25. Right, that's gonna exaggerate the normals for the moving part here. Let's save this again. Then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add refraction. And the way we're going to do that is again with a depth fade, and we're going to connect that to a linear interpolate. I'm going to hook this one up to the alpha, this one in our refraction, and I'm going to set this one to close to our edges of the river, and then refracting further in. Alright, gonna hit apply again. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to jump back into Houdini, and I want to change the location of my digital asset. I'm going to edit asset properties, and I'm going to change where I saved it, because now I actually want it to be inside of my procedural stream. So I'm going to go in the content, HTA, and I'm going to save it here, accept it. And I wanted this permission to switch as well. I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to hit accept. Alright, so now if we jump back into Unreal, we can actually start and look at stuff we did. So if I'm going into my HTAs, this specific file directory, so my content, third person, HTA, procedural stream, open, and it's right here. So the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another window with modes. I'm just going to create a quick landscape. Don't need it to be this big, it's just for testing out if our scene works. Scroll down, and I'm going to see if I change this. Let's say 6 by 6. And hit create. Now we have our grid, and I can actually play test this. I can walk around on it. Alright, perfect. And I'm going to drag in my HDA. Need another window, so I'll go to my details pane, and then here Houdini is running, and I get all the information that I had before. So in the first input we needed a curve, as we remembered, and the second one is our landscape. But the landscape that we used in Houdini was a mesh, so for now I'm going to set this one to mesh. And when I click this, it's going to compose. But what I want to do first is I want to draw out our curve. So since we have our curve input here, I should be able to draw out our points. And just by holding Alt, I can drag more and more points. Zoom out a little bit more, and make sure that our points are outside of our initial geometry. I'm going to make it curved like this. Alright, then I'm going to select my landscape. And the moment I do that, Houdini starts calculating. And there we go. We have our initial setup of the terrain. So before I'm going to do anything else, I'm quickly going to turn off my landscape so I can check, and I can see that all the vertex colors, everything now aligns. Alright, so let's continue on the materials, because just having this blank slate doesn't really work for us. So we're going to go back into our materials, and I'm going to create another material, and this material is going to be called M_, rain. And I'm gonna open that one up. So just for the purpose of these tutorials, I already created one folder that I'm gonna copy in here right now. And it has some textures, as you can see. I have a few dirt ones, my base color, ambient occlusion, my normals, and I have a picture of leaves. Not too interesting, but you know, eventually we'll get to work it all together. So let's start off with some texture samples again. Right. So in this texture sample, I'm again gonna set my materials, and I call dirt. So I want to have my ambient occlusion. I'm just gonna copy these around, all of them in the right places. Right, so obviously the ambient occlusion goes in ambient occlusion, and then we have the normals going into the normal, roughness map one, and then finally our base color in this one. I'm quickly gonna set all of them. So this is gonna be the base color. It's going to be the roughness. All right. Oh, one thing that is important to remember in this is that I want to use the world space. So I'm going to use absolute world space. And I'm going to hook that up to another mask. And then I'm going to multiply this by 0.0. And then I'm going to hook those up into the UVs. And what this allows me is to move around my tiling textures, as you can see. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the parameters in this one, because I want it to blend based on the vertex colors that we have. So I'm going to put in the vertex color, and I'm going to multiply that and then I'm going to copy this texture here, and then I'm going to create a linear interpolate again, and I'm going to multiply this one, and I'm going to linear interpolate these two. My alpha is going to be based on my vertex color. Base color goes in here. Although we still have to set those to world position as well. So let's drag those in there as well. Okay, let's hit apply. Alright, well, that gives us our texture. Let's look at it in our viewport here. So what I'm quickly going to do is I'm going to grab this one, grab our HDA, and I'm going to recalculate my flow maps. So basically what that does is it bakes out the texture again, but now based on the view that we have. And as you can see, it opens up a new screen, or it opens up a screen and it asks if I want to delete the temporary file. So I'm going to delete that one, and then I'm going to set my width a little bit different. I'm going to change my water height to make sure that I actually see what's going on. I'm going to rebuild the instances, so I'm going to recook again. And one more time, I'm going to recalculate the flow maps, because now our river is wider. And you can actually see that the texture has been updated. So you see all our extras, and you now actually have the flow map texture in here as well. So our flow maps get generated. This is our temporary picture. It's basically the same as our alpha. It's going to ask us to delete the temporary one, and we have our original flow map again. And as you can see, we actually have some water flowing with our terrain. Alright, so let's copy the terrain reference that we have, and let's open that one up in Houdini. Going in again, going to our materials in our terrain. I'm going to paste it, change the name again. Save my asset, and then when I go back to Unreal and I rebuild the asset again, it should immediately get my material, at least on the terrain. And as you remember, we made 3 different groups, one being the terrain, one being the river, and one being the riverbed. We haven't given the riverbed the terrain yet, so that's what we're going to do next. Into our materials, and we're going to create another material. And I see that I made a mistake. So our terrain is actually our riverbed, and then later on in the this material we're gonna blend between the leaves and the dirt. I also think that the dirt is a little bit light, so I'm gonna make this a little bit darker in Photoshop. So I've replaced the material here, and now all I have to do is rename these ones. So I'm gonna rename, and my riverbed is going to be my terrain. Let's rename this something simple, and rename our terrain to our riverbed, and then we can rename this one again to be our material terrain. Alright. Yeah, so for the terrain, that's actually a quite tough one. So I want to first focus on finishing our flow maps, because the flow is not really nice yet. So there's like a few things that I still want to do, and I'm gonna do that right now. And I'm gonna run really quickly through these all. First, I'm gonna have I'm going to have my world position offset, and I'm gonna add some parameters to that. So I'm gonna start off. I'm just gonna show you how I'm building this. I'll have my time input, and then from my time input I'm going to a multiply, and I'm multiplying my time in this example by 0.1, and then I will create my texture sample again, And for the texture sample, I'm basically going to use this one again. Oh, not the texture object, but the sample. I want to use the water normal again. Right. I don't want to directly put this in there. I want to start and create a panner because I want my river to actually move. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a simple expression, texture coordinates, that goes into my coordinates, and my multiply goes in my time, and my time goes in my UVs. Then from here, I'm going to create another multiply, and I'm going to multiply my red channel with my vertex normals in world space. I'm going to connect that there. And then I want to make it a little bit bigger, so I'm going to create a constant, and I'm just going to start off with 10, multiply those, and that gives me my world position offset, which is exactly what I want. But my Flowmap simple can actually also use this or use these inputs. So I'm going to use the texture coordinates, and I'm going to put those in the UVs, and I'm going to use my first multiply just before the panner and give that my time. So that should do the trick for my water. So let's apply, and let's close this one down. And since our riverbed is pretty much done as well, of course I'm going to close that one down. And this brings us to the end of the second part of this tutorial series. The next tutorial is going to be going a little bit more in depth into the terrain blending based on vertex colors, and we're going to make sure that the flow map, the riverbed, and the terrain all work nicely together. I want to thank everybody for watching and listening to me nag on about all this stuff in Houdini and Unreal. This was Dokai. Bye bye.